Tēnā koe Sandy, nei re whakatika I tō ingoa, I mua I a tātou katoa I tēnei pō. Our final panellist tonight is Professor Robyn Longhurst. Tēnā koe Robyn.
I would just like to say at the outset that it's a real privilege sharing the stage tonight with these amazing three wahine here. As Sarah said in her introduction, of course, the Black Lives Matter movement, while we know it has its roots in the US, it's prompted protest across many parts of the world, and including here in Aotearoa. So one of the topics, as you'll know, that's been prompting a lot of dissension has been statues, and the statues have already been mentioned this evening. Statues are a way of memorialising the past, and of course pasts often built on slavery, colonisation and racism. They aren't just backdrops to daily life, but they're intended to commemorate what societies value. In the Black Lives Matter movement, since the tragic killing of George Floyd on the 25th of May, has helped cast light on many statues around the world, and so I want to take the opportunity this evening to reflect on a couple in Kirikiriroa. But actually not just those that memorialise colonisation. Statues reflect power relations across numerous axes of power, so race and colonisation are very important ones for this evening, but also class, gender and sexuality. So I want to start by focusing on a statue that actually resists dominant power relations, and that is Riff-Raff, which many of you will be familiar with. The Riff-Raff statue in Victoria Street celebrates the iconic Riff-Raff character from the time-warping alien from the planet Transsexual from the Rocky Horror Picture Show. And, as many of you will know, of course, it stands on the now-demolished Embassy Theatre site where Richard O'Brien, who played Riff-Raff in the movie, used to spend time. So Riff-Raff's not the norm as far as statues go. And when a colleague and I finished a book manuscript on how sexuality affects the way people interact with place, we asked our US-based editor if we could have Hamilton's own Riff-Raff statue on the cover. She wasn't entirely convinced about that, but we eventually got her over the line. So another statue or monument, though, that also conveys a theme of sexual difference is the Gay Liberation Monument in a park close to Stonewall Inn, which is a gay club in Greenwich Village in New York. So in 1969, an uprising took place when police violently raided the bar and patrons fought back. The uprising's widely considered to constitute one of the most important events leading to the gay liberation movement in the US. And the Gay Liberation Monument, completed in 1980, features 2 gay men and 2 lesbians. So the bronze statues are covered in white lacquer. But in 2015, prompted by Black Lives Matter activists, there was the painting of these 2 figures' faces brown to protest the way the statues, what the activists called whitewasher movement. So they argue that this was actually a movement led by black and brown, queer and trans people. So they painted the statues brown and dressed them in wigs and bright costumes. So statues are often contested, which brings me back to recent events in Kirikiriroa. So as many of you know, of course, on the 25th of June, a crane hoisted a bronze sculpture of Captain Hamilton from Civic Square after threats from local Māori and anti-racism protesters to topple it. The controversial statue was donated to the council in 2013, and Mayor Paula Southgate has said, and I quote, "I know many people find the statue personally and culturally offensive. We can't ignore what is happening all over the world, and nor should we." But another statue that's received less attention in Kirikiriroa is the farming family, which is donated by Sir Bob Jones. It was unveiled in 1990 at the southern junction of Ulster and Victoria Streets, and it depicts a so-called ordinary farming family. It consists of a life-size figure of a man, a woman, 2 children, a dog, a cow and a sheep. And the statue is intended to celebrate the role of the farming family in history. But it sparked some controversy a few years ago for showing, in fact, a very Eurocentric history of the Waikato. So all landscapes reflect these power relations of gender and sexuality, class, but also, and of course key to tonight's panel discussion, ethnicity, race, racism and colonisation. So we all interpret landscapes every day. We look at tagging on walls, manicured lawns, signs on shops, and they convey to us these impressions of poverty or wealth, of diversity or homogeneity, but also feelings of whether we belong or don't belong somewhere. And so the question is really, what should we do with existing statues? We can create new ones in our future, and a colleague had suggested to me that maybe we could have one of the anti-Springbok protesters who'd blocked the Hamilton rugby match in 1981. But what about those existing statues, those statues of old, statues of slave traders, of colonisers, of farming families? Should they be removed, painted, beheaded, toppled? Or perhaps, as Tuhoe Maori activist Tama Iti once suggested, all placed together where people can talk about them, like a racist museum. Recently, Professor Paul Spoonley commented, public statues and monuments should be kept so people can be reminded about the good and bad events of New Zealand history. But I'm actually not so sure that there's a one-size-fits-all answer to my question. The Black Lives Matter movement illustrates, well, to me at least, that there are many people who don't want to be continually reminded of the bad events of history. There are enough effects of racism and colonisation in people's lives serving as daily reminders. So actually, to return to Mayor Southgate again, she also recently commented that we need to have these brave and honest discussions about the past, something again Sarah mentioned in her introduction, and I agree. So each monument, its specific context, the communities of people it stands amongst, needs to be thought about carefully. We need to have courageous conversations, each from our different embodied positions. So just by way of an example, a few months ago in the US, the Library of Virginia held what it called a civic conversation about monuments. It was free, open to the public, and part of a small group discussion series encouraging informed conversations around complex topics affecting the state of Virginia. So every 2 weeks, the library screens a segment from a documentary film, followed by a roundtable conversation with input from a moderator and a historical expert from the library. So people who go along are encouraged to share their perspectives with the group. And I offer this actually just as one very small example of one of the many steps we could take to help support freedom, liberation, justice, these all being very important cornerstones, of course, of the Black Lives Matter movement. Kia ora.
I want to, there are a couple of questions which are very similar, so I'll kind of rephrase them, and they're both forward-thinking questions. So for all of the panel, how can Pākehā, Māori and other members of our community here in Hamilton work together to create a safer and more supportive city in Aotearoa, New Zealand? And I think probably more about, if you had the opportunity, what would that vision of our future look like?
I think for me the vision for the future would be really about practicing true partnership, a true treaty partnership, and seeing Māori faces, Māori voices, Māori participation across the board politically, and environmental management and so forth, and just having a more balanced shared power across our spaces. Yeah.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, Sandy. I think those concepts of the so integral to the Black Lives Matter movement, and justice and equity, and I think having a more equitable society across all of those areas, education, health, justice system, would be a huge start towards having a society in which everybody felt much more valued than perhaps many people do now. How we get there, is the daily struggle. But a society where we didn't have a huge disparity in wealth and all of the different outcomes, political, social, economic, and so on, I think would be where I'd want to head in the future.
Thank you. Just for our audience, before I bring the session to a close, for those of you who may be asking why these panellists, Kaupapa Kōrero is an opportunity for the university to present to our community, including our university community, but beyond our university community, some of our students and researchers and academics who have been working in this space or who are studying in this space. And so our panellists